Hi everyone! We're going to do some painting together today, so let's round up our materials.
Of course, we need our paints, brushes, a cup of water about halfway full, some watercolor paper, a few test strips for practicing colors before you add them to your work, a piece of paraffin wax, a little sea sponge, some things from around the house that'll come in handy is some plastic wrap just like this, a bit of paper towel, some sea salt or table salt, and some leaves from around the yard. Let's get started. All right, we're going to start with the splatter technique. This is a fun and easy one, just a great little warm-up, but it is messy, so please make sure that you have your tables covered or you're working in a space where getting messy is okay. You can see that I have decided to start with yellow today. I've loaded my brush with water and now I am mixing that water up with the dry paint. And now I'm just knocking my paintbrush against my finger. And the paint is landing in random splatters all over. So I'm done with the yellow. I'm going to blot out the brush on this paper towel. That's going to take most of the yellow paint out so that I can keep the water for rinsing clear a little bit longer. And you can see the brush has gone nice and clean. And we'll try some more colors now. So I think part of the fun here is to have as many colors splattered as possible. I think something else that could be fun is to think about what you might be able to do with this technique. Maybe you could think about using it to put spots on an animal, or maybe it is a pattern on a rock that you're painting. There's a lot of different ways that you could think about using this technique. So use your imagination and think about how you can layer those colors and splatters for your next project. For the plastic wrap lift, we're going to start just by adding a bunch of color to our page. I have decided to work with green and blue and brown this time. Just felt like doing some colors that are kind of what reminds me of being out in nature. So I'm starting with the blue here. I'm just loading it up with a bunch of color. Just going to do a big wash of blue over the entire page. And of course, friends, you are welcome to work with any colors you would like at any time. This is your project. You don't have to be following along with every single step I do, just in the same order and colors that I am doing. Please make this project your own. And now that we have the blue done, I'm going to move on to adding the other colors, mixing lots of water here, mixing lots of paint into that water so that the surface of the page will be nice and wet for when we apply the plastic wrap afterwards. This is another one of those times, friends, where I just want to remind you to go ahead and do whatever you feel like doing. There's no need to be following along with my squiggly lines. You can be adding shapes, you can be drawing straight lines or zigzags. You could even try drawing a face and see what happens next. Now I am ready to add my plastic wrap, so I'm just stretching it out. I'm giving it a few little crinkle folds just so that it's going to grab some neat little creases and create some cool patterns. And now we just wait until it dries. All right, I've waited as long as I possibly can. I'm ready to pull that paper off my painting and see what the finished result looks like. And it's time to try out our sponging technique. So we're going to start by adding a wash of color I've decided to go with yellow just because I wanted to start with a lighter color and then I'll sponge darker colors over top. Okay, so I have a whole surface washed of yellow and I've blotted out my brush, and rather than grabbing that small brush, I am going to grab the sea sponge, get it a little bit wet and give it a dip in my orange paint and start sponging around over top of the yellow on my page. And just as I do with my paintbrush, I'm blotting my sponge and rinsing it and then grabbing another color. I've moved on to red and I'm adding a layer of sponges of red over top here. And I think I am happy with my 3 layers of color, so I'm going to call it there. But if you want to keep going, then keep on sponging. We're going to start this time with a wash of clean water over the surface of our page. So just spreading water over the surface of the paper will soften the surface of the paper and make it really kind of spongy and absorbent, all the paint and colors that we're going to add in a minute. You know, it might seem funny, but this time I am going to start with a little bit of white paint. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to add some darker colors afterwards, and I want to maybe let them blend in some spots and let them get a little bit lighter. Okay, we're ready to start with some color. I'm starting with red. Jump into whatever colors you'd like to paint with today. I think I have just about enough red, so this time I'm going to move on and add some blue, and look at how it's bleeding out. That is my favorite thing about watercolors. That is happening because we added so much water at the start of this project. And you can see that I've moved on to adding a third color. It's orange for me this time, but hopefully you're painting along with whatever colors you feel like painting with. And now that I've done that, I am ready to apply some salt. So I just have some sea salt here. If you have table salt, you should be okay to use that. And I'm just sprinkling it all over the wet surface of my page. And now I'm just gonna wait and see what happens once it's dry. Now that things are dry, the only step left is to just brush off any of the excess salt, all those little crumbs that are sitting on the surface of your page. And we're all done. For a wax resist, we start by adding lines of wax to our paper, which we will then paint over. So you can see I'm using a hunk of paraffin wax. We've included these in our art kits if you've got one of those. Otherwise, another thing that you can use is just crayon. You could try using white crayon to get sort of this invisible line technique that I'm doing here, but you might be amazed at what using different colored crayons will do too. Now that I've finished drawing my lines, it's time to get some paint. And you're going to see very quickly exactly where the lines that I drew in the wax came up. So a wax resist is actually called a resist because the watercolor is literally resisting the wax that we put down on the page. So go ahead and fill up that whole page. Get every little bit of that wax surrounded by the paint so that you can see the pattern that you've created. Load it up with lots of color. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do this time is load up our paintbrush with clean water and spread that water about on the surface of our paper. What this does is it softens the paper and gets it ready to receive the paint and really help it spread out in beautiful ways, which is going to work really well for this project. and we're ready to move on to adding some color. I've chosen to start with green, but you can definitely start with any color that you would like to work with, because we're going to work with a lot of different colors this time. So just dotting the colors around the page, kind of in a random pattern. You can try some different movements with your brush, maybe give it a little wiggle, make some bigger circles, maybe make some little lines, and then you can just blot out your brush on a paper towel and give it a rinse before moving on to another color. And I'm going to add one more color before moving on to the next step. And I'm ready to add some leaves to my work. I'm arranging the leaves just really randomly, but if you want to try a pattern, you could try putting them all in a row, maybe play with balance a little bit. I'm even going to let some of these leaves just float off the edge of the paper, but I'm always pressing down and making sure the leaves are getting some good contact with the paint. And now I'm adding yet another color again. And this time what I'm doing is I'm really focusing on the areas at the edges of the leaves. What this is going to do is actually allow some of that paint to seep in underneath the leaves and give us some really beautiful patterns once everything's dried. I'm going to add just a few more dots of color here, and then it's time to wait. Gotta let it dry for the next step. All right, friends, I have waited as long as I can. Let's see what's under these leaves. Wow, look at how the color has remained and the patterns of those leaves have created these beautiful shapes. I love it.